Hello and welcome back, everyone. Happy Wednesday. We could have had it all. We should have had it all. We should have had the triple happy weekday, but instead we get a hello and welcome. Welcome is capitalized. I kind of am a fan of that, but we received no happy Wednesday on this Wednesday, the 23rd of October, denying us the chance for the first ever triple happy week. So, despite us getting a surprise happy Tuesday and having a happy Thursday ostensibly tomorrow, we will not have the triple happy weekday because we lost out on the happy Wednesday for the Tinto talks. This is a sad thing. However, I have some happy news, and that is about slavery. The slavery mechanics that are outlined in, Tinto talks here for the upcoming big secret, big top game Europa Universalis 5, aka Project Teaser. These mechanics actually seem really, really nice, and by really nice I mean mean, because slavery is mean, but I do think that it's pretty good for the simulation. I think that it's very interesting, and so we're going to dive in and take a closer look at some slavery. Hello and welcome to another Tinto Talk, where we spill information and forget to wish you a happy Wednesday on this critical triple happy weekday about our secret unannounced game with the codename Project Teaser. You may say it's pronounced Project Kaiser, but it's Project Tizar, similar to Taser. We were shocked this week, certainly, when we did not receive our happy Wednesday for... tragic. Okay. This week we will talk about how slavery works in game. We're slave to the game. Slave pops, one of the 6 types of pops we have, are slaves. These lack pretty much every right in all countries and are simply exploited. They are not allowed to move around on their own. They have a harsh enough lives that they basically live only keeping the current population levels at the best of times, so you're not going to expect too much pop growth, and they have absolutely no income or political power. If they get any sort of literacy, they are very likely to be rather upset. That makes a whole lot of sense. You know, when you read about slavery in the U.S. and, Diary of a Slave, I think that was Frederick Douglass, in particular, you see how, as soon as he got the ability to read, he's like, wow, this is, all this nonsense is pretty messed up. At the start of the game, the usage of slaves is mostly gone from Europe, but it's more prevalent in other parts of the world. We see slaves in Cairo, Circassian slaves, part of the slaves at Cairo at the start. Okay, 5,000. Usage of slaves. Slaves are primarily used in resource-gathering operations, but they can also be used in various buildings. These types of buildings can be categorized in 2 types of buildings. First, we have the slave-soldier buildings that require slaves to function and produce manpower or sailors. These include buildings like Mamluk or Janissary barracks, which provide part of the armies of the Mamluks and the Ottomans. Very interesting. The second category we have is plantations. These are the buildings you unlock in the Age of Discovery advances. There are roughly 3 types of plantations for tobacco, sugar, and cotton. So already we are seeing something that is a little bit interesting here, which is that there's going to be regional influence. Sugar, tobacco, and cotton, I'm guessing, cannot be produced all that well in the old world, but are going to be very easy to produce in the new world, and so we see a little bit of a sort of railroad in the sense that we can't use slaves for everything. We could use them for these specific industries. So regions that have a lot of these industries or a lot of these resources are going to be able to benefit much more from having slavery as a sort of institution, although we don't have the institution mechanic here in Europa Universalis 5. But this is a bit of an interesting one that is semi-railroady, because they are not universal pops that we could use for any type of manual labor, but instead they are specialized and nailed down on specific buildings, which is going to lead to, this is maybe a little bit less sandboxy, but it is going to lead to, I think, more, depending on how colonization looks, it's going to lead to gameplay patterns that are, you have different strategies based on how your country looks and what your resources look like and this sort of thing. And maybe slavery is really, really good for some countries that have a lot of these industries, or are going to have a lot of these industries, and is really just not that good for other industries. So this is, I think, an interesting choice, and we'll see how it feels when we get to it. These are far more productive than the RGO for the same goods, but require slaves to function. So this is the crux of the thing, is that if we are producing these things, we would prefer a slaving-oriented way of going about it, assuming that this gain in productivity exceeds the price of the slaves here. Here we see a galley barracks in Genoa that is getting sailors and is, as one of the inputs, requires slaves. Which this is interesting because slaves are simultaneously a good and a population. So this is something that is an interesting handling, but of course it makes a whole lot of sense. So, of course, there are other uses for slaves. In some regions, you need a steady stream of them to sacrifice to make the sun go up the next day. Shout out to Quetzalcoatl, or however it's pronounced. Quetzalcoatl? Something like that. Acquiring slaves. There are multiple ways to get slaves. First of all, you have the classic way of conquering nearby territories and enslaving populations as you sack their cities. This is something that has diverse cultures amongst others. The Haudenosaunee, Aztec, and Canaan Empire can do from the start. Apologies for pronunciations. They also get access to easiest casus belli to go on slave raiding wars. As you sack a city, a percentage of the population will become slaves and appear in the closest slave market you have. If none is available, then they're taken to the closest slave market nearby. This is really cool. They are going as goods to a particular building. I think that this is, I mean, as a mechanic, this seems way better than like some sort of strange abstraction where they just instantly appear in the city. They're going to appear not just like randomly in a city, but appear as an economic unit, which is of course the idea of like how this whole institution works. Secondly, we have the Berber states who are engaged in slave raiding from the start, or from the sea. In EU4, this was a button you clicked on your ships when they were near coast that had no slave raiding cooldown active. In Project Tizar, this ability is part of the privateering mechanic, in that if you have access to this ability, then your privateers will raid a random coastal location in an area they're in and take some of the pops there as slaves for the closest slave market. This is stopped by having a truce, above 100 opinion, or a good old coastal fortress. So we see here a bunch of mechanics that allow you to prevent this type of thing. I assume this maybe damages relations, maybe it doesn't, but this is a way to acquire slaves. We see coastal raiding. Morocco is one of the countries that can do this from day one. Sounds good. Thirdly, you can have a slave market building, which acts as a hub for slave trades. So someone else can be engaged in the acquisition of slaves and then ship them to them. It will try and enslave props of non-accepted cultures and different groups. This is to simulate how the Delhi Sultanate and the other enslaved people, and others enslaved people in their conquered lands over time. Or this is kind of the third way, and then there's a final and fourth way. Fourthly, you have the possibility to build slave centers in foreign locations. So here we see this is a really key interaction that we haven't seen, that is kind of brought up by their decision to allow you to build in foreign countries. If you build slave centers in foreign countries in order to kind of slowly gain their pops, then they will have to either go to war with you in order to get rid of this or this type of thing, and this creates interactions that I think are interesting. And I think that this mechanic of this like needing to build in foreign locations is kind of like a little bit of a necessary one to like properly simulate what exactly is going on and the entrenchment and effects of like European powers as it relates to the entire slave trade, European and colonial powers as it relates to slave trade, because you need to have a method that allows the foreign power agency and extraction of slaves from Africa in order to properly simulate what's going on here, and in order to allow them to leverage economics, aka the purchase cost of the building, in order to acquire more slaves, in order to kind of keep the gears of the plantations going, except they didn't have gears, rather they had hands of slaves. The truth hurts. Okay. You can build it in foreign locations that have less power projection than you. So this is the limiting mechanic, and so you can prevent this from having more power projection, or through other ways we're about to read about. This is to simulate how part of the Europeans got their slaves from West Africa to the New World, while a significant part of the slaves were brought from other African kingdoms that were willing to sell slaves from their enemies. They were also locally captured by slavers themselves near slave centers. If you wish to fight this in your territories, you need to go to war and forcefully expel them. So, foreign power, more power projection. They can build a slaving thing, a slave center in your country. You either have to get more power projection than them, or you have to expel them through violence. It might even be the case that if you have more power projection when they after they build it, but not before, they still have this influence kind of holding over you, which is slowly extracting your pops, which is obviously not something you're interested in doing. Here you can see the inputs. Notably, we're using the slaves to produce the slaves. Here we see some paper, some weapons, leather, and whatever that is. I forget. But we do see that it is going to be producing slaves here, which is... I'm wondering how this abstraction interacts with population directly. If every time you produce a slave and you ship it, if like population decreases, something like this. But okay. Finally, you could trade for slaves. In Project Caesar, slaves exist both as a type of good and a type of pop, and they are slightly linked. Yeah. Buildings can produce slaves and require slaves' goods as an input. When a slave good is traded between markets, the game will move pops in relative sizes to locations that have a demand for slaves. So this can solve the labor problem. Thus, if you have buildings or resource gathering operations that can use slaves, they will create demand for slaves in the market. And if you trade for slaves from a market that both produces slave goods and has enough slaves present, the game will move about 200 pops, okay, from the slave market each month for each good you trade. So this can maybe be, it'll be interesting to see what the downsides of it are. As I've read so far, and I recall from kind of my skimming through this, there didn't really seem to be any downsides from slavery at this juncture, other than if they learn how to read. If they learn how to read, then you're maybe in trouble. But if you just prevent that from happening, maybe you're in good shape. But maybe that's hard to do. At the start of the game, there is a trans-Saharan route where the northern African countries import slaves from West Africa, many sold by the Kenem Empire. Later on in the Age of Discovery, you will see triangular trade between Europe, West Africa, and Americas, which will reduce the trans-Saharan trade route volumes. This will be really interesting to see exactly, like this was a major and influential thing that went on during this time period. It'll be interesting to see how the mechanics managed to parallel kind of what happened historically in, you know, the shipment from the U.S. of a ton of cotton and various, you know, types of plantation goods to the Old World. The Old World shipping a bunch of money to purchase, or, you know, the trade moves in a triangle. I forget what the Old World just kind of bought slaves from, you know, the Africa, and then they shipped back to America, trading the slaves again. So it just kind of moved in a circle where, you know, the main end receivers of a lot of the products of the slaves' labor was the Old World, and of course they kept the entire machine chugging. Okay, there's also another market system, as the Mongol states have access to taking slaves when conquering land, and they created the greatest slaving network the world has ever seen. Greatest is maybe not the word we would like to use, but sure. Since Muslim states could not keep Muslim slaves and Christians did not want to have Christian slaves, the Mongols traded Muslims to the Christians and Christians to the Muslim countries. The trade links from India go to Central Asia as well, as Delhi trades their slaves to other markets. While they get slaves, they require for their Mamluk-style armies. So we do see some unique flavor for different countries as well, on top of kind of all the other things that seem particularly good for slaving or slave trade, which is they're operating as a good and a pop simultaneously. There's a bunch of different ways to acquire slaves. We could see that there were four outlined here. No, 5. There were 5 outlined here, 5 different ways to get slaves. And as a mechanic, I think that this seems pretty well fleshed out. Oh, man, fleshed out. Poor choice of words. In terms of how it's going to be implemented in EU4 here, or EU5 here. So really liking this. I thought it was a pretty good way of addressing the mechanic. I hope you enjoyed. We will be, by the way, if you've gotten to the end here, shout out to you, we will be streaming tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. PST. I think we will be starting for Romans the Three Kingdoms 8 Remake, streaming for 12 hours, and then the following day, the 25th, we will be streaming probably all day for Victoria 3 as well, as that's the 2-year anniversary. Still haven't decided what we're going to be doing yet. If anyone has any suggestions, feel free to let us know. So far, some things that have been suggested include playing the release version of the game, which is a hot mess. So we'll see what we'll be doing then. But YouTube algorithm stuff, like, comment, subscribe, etc. And other than that, have a happy Wednesday. I'm sorry we couldn't do it. I'm sorry we couldn't get the triple happy weekday, but we will still have a double happy weekday off the back of off the back of the developers slaving away on the Victoria 3 code, giving us 2 happy weekdays, picking up the slack that has been left behind by the Tinto team working on Project Teaser, giving us just the capital welcome, the knife, the dagger in our side, where they're just like sticking the needle in because they must know that you capitalize the happy Wednesday, and so this is like, we got the capitalization, but where's the happy? Who knows? Not here.